we'll allow the justice system to deal with them for their transgressions. Now, Madam Speaker, that's $8 million. And you recognize that Comrade Asset Michael just won his case. That $8 million that was spent in 2008 was utilized primarily for the witch hunt, the political witch hunt to jail members of the Antigua-Labour Party. Now, who benefited? Obviously, the attorneys, including the external attorneys who they have to pay, Madam Speaker. And I can say here that the UPP government would have incurred at least an additional $30 million during the term, during the tenure, Madam Speaker, in investigative fees, which, in essence, would have gone to naught. Because at the end of the day, you ain't locking up anybody over here. You ain't jailing anybody over here. So they are wasting our scarce resources, Madam Speaker. And I want to put it to the Honourable Member for Rural East, the Honourable Prime Minister, that those funds, Madam Speaker, could have been better employed in improving the living standards of the people of Rural West, the people of Grace Farm and Green Bay. Those funds, Madam Speaker, could have been better utilized to improve the living standards of the people of Point and Villa. And, Madam Speaker, we don't have many things in common, but if there's one thing we have in common, we represent two ghettos. And we must learn to prioritize as politicians in this country. You can't have your people suffering, living in substandard housing. Some people don't even have food to eat, Madam Speaker, while you're wasting millions of dollars trying to put people in jail. Madam Speaker, that is misbehavior in public office. And I believe that the people of this country should punish the Honourable Prime Minister and his other ministers for wasting the scarce resources. It is misbehavior in public office, and I hope, Madam Speaker, I pray that the member for Rural West loses his seat at the next general elections, because he knows better. He grew up poor, Madam Speaker, and he ought to have known that his first priority ought to have been to ensure that there's full employment in Rural West, to ensure that there's proper housing, to ensure that his people get better health care, better jobs, better educational opportunities, Madam Speaker. Instead, he's on this witch hunt in order to sustain his party in power. And, Madam Speaker, when you look at the various programs, including the so-called fiscal stabilization program, practically every single program that was introduced by the UPP, Madam Speaker, has failed. The fiscal stabilization program has failed miserably, and today Antigua and Barbuda is in a more precarious position, financial position, than it was back in 2004. Because even though we had fiscal constraints, even though we had a funding gap of $150 million, the Antigua-Labour Party government had the option to tax, to increase taxes by $150 million to close the gap. We didn't, for various reasons. At one point, Madam Speaker, it is true that the technicians in the Ministry of Finance had proposed that we reduce the amount of staff in the public sector by about 2,000. And even though that recommendation was made and we had serious financial constraints, we refused to do it because we recognize the attendant social consequences. So when they have all the rhetoric on the platform that we had planned to send them 2,000 people, it's nonsense. Because at the end of the day, you have to look at the reality that the Antigua-Labour Party did not send home anyone. And I'm one of the individuals in the cabinet who fought against that, Madam Speaker, that recommendation. And even though we had those difficulties, we recognize that, look, at the end of the day, as politicians, as a government, our primary objective is to provide for the people of this country. And we felt that by sending them home, on the one hand, that is going to create fundamental social costs in terms of the escalation in crime and so on. And, Madam Speaker, today you can see the results of increased crime in this country as a result of the increased hardship that the UPP government has brought to bear on the people of this country. But going back to the fiscal stabilization program, they inherited a fiscal deficit of $150 million under the ALP. They went to the nation and they said to the people of this country, tighten your belts. We're going to increase taxes. And the people of this country responded. And I want to say here, Madam Speaker, they came into government on a wave of credibility. People believe in them. They gave us a thrashing prior to the last elections. And we, at that time, would not have had the moral authority, based on the things that they would have said about us and people believe. We would not have had the authority to increase taxes at that time, because people had bought into all the rhetoric coming from members of the UPP. They came in, the people believed in them, they gave them $400 million more in taxes. Now, Madam Speaker, they only needed $150 million. They got $400 million more to close that fiscal gap. And what did they do, Madam Speaker? They squandered it. In fact, the fiscal deficit has actually increased. They squandered it, Madam Speaker. They had a great opportunity to put government finances on sound footing. But instead, they allowed all of the expenditure to balloon out of control. So rather than the situation getting better, they actually exacerbated the situation. That is what has happened. For this year, Madam Speaker, the UPP government is projecting to spend in excess of $1 billion. And you know, to add insult to injury, the people of this country are not getting good value for money. Not only are they wasting our scarce resources on ministerial travel and all the sport utility vehicles and so on, but they are wasting our monies through corrupt government contracting. Madam Speaker, the UPP government boasted of spending in excess of $400 million on roads, curbs, and drains in this country. Assuming that figure is correct, and assuming that a mile of road would reasonably cost about, let's say, 1.5 or even 2 million or even 2.5 million, Madam Speaker.
I think this is 1.5.
Well, let's say 2 million. I was told 1.5. Let's say even 2 million, Madam Speaker, for a mile of road. One would have expected 200 miles of roads to have been completed in this country. And I guarantee you that they have not even done a quarter of that. Last year, through his speech, Governor General indicated that the government spent $113 million sprucing up St. John's. That's less than 4 miles of roads, Madam Speaker. $117 million. So you can see very clearly that the people of this country have been called upon to sacrifice, to pay additional taxes, but on the other hand, the UPP government has failed to deliver a corresponding amount of value to the people of this country. Madam Speaker, we cannot continue to have a situation here in which the members of the UPP, including a member for Rural East, calling upon the people of this country to tighten their belts while they continue to get fat. That has to stop. And the only way to stop it, Madam Speaker, is for the people of this country to vote the UPP out of government and to understand that they are safer with Labour. Madam Speaker, the UPP also introduced a voluntary separation package or voluntary separation program in which they claimed that they were going to reduce the wage bill, which they met under $300 million. And what has happened today? That very wage bill, Madam Speaker, is now in excess of $450 million. Now, Madam Speaker, isn't that incompetence? Isn't that gross incompetence? Here's a situation in which individuals who normally would have left the service by attrition, you don't have to pay them nothing to leave. They too, Madam Speaker, were given a package to leave, to go to the United States to live. And we all know about the depletion of skills within the public sector, because it was primarily those who were mobile, those who were better educated, better skilled, who took the package and moved on. And some, Madam Speaker, even took the package knowing that they could have gone back to members of the UPP to get employed in other public sector corporations. So at the end of the day, no cost savings was actually achieved. Yet another failed UPP program. Madam Speaker, the people of this country must understand that at the end of the day, there's a lot of rhetoric coming from the other side. But when you examine their performance, Madam Speaker, the UPP government has been a dismal failure. A dismal failure. They introduced a fiscal stabilization program, and instead of the gap being closed or eliminated, it widened. Now let me ask this question. what has changed in this country since the fiscal stabilization program was introduced by the UPP? Are we borrowing less? The answer is no. A resounding no. In fact, Madam Speaker, the UPP